and use of devices that go beyond mere devices ownership is very important. To ensure local participation, community perception of technology must be factored into the planning of any technology-supported education program.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of striking figures and findings. Of course, we'll build upon them, and the presentations would be slightly more explanatory, but this background was necessary. I do understand that many of you have been kind to travel from long distances, so we have working tea served in this hall. You can help yourself, or you can just call upon our staff. And second, I think there would be colleagues who would also be joining us over the live stream. So you can pass on your questions and comments to our team, which is handling the STPI handle. With this, let me invite Dr. Friya Armaghan for the study presentation.
Extremely grateful to all of you for your gracious presence here. Just a quick brief presented concerning the study by the visual package. And now I will be presenting the detailed study via this presentation. So again, the title of the study is Investigating the Impact on Learning Outcomes Through the Use of Edtech During COVID-19, Evidence from a Randomized Controlled Trial in the Punjab province of Pakistan. I'll be covering all these segments, from the objectives to the methodology, intervention designs, what were the key findings, and what it holds for policymakers in terms of policy integration. So essentially, we have a growing landscape of primary and secondary education in Pakistan, and these learning crises are further exacerbated by the effects of COVID-19. COVID-19 drastically impacted the education system in Pakistan and has deepened the inequalities, especially for the students from the disadvantaged background. So that is why particularly we are focusing on the economically disadvantaged area of South Punjab, and we conducted this study in the district of Bahawalnagar. The prime objectives of the study were to explore the types of technologies being used in the disadvantaged area, and understand the constraints faced by education system in the use of technology in such settings. The second objective was to investigate what role tech-based solution could have in aiding the objective of personalized learning during school closures, during intermittent school closures off and on throughout 2020 and 21. And finally assess the impact of selected interventions on the learning outcomes for the three core subjects of English, mathematics, and Urdu for learners in grade 8th of secondary school system. So it's a study essentially focusing on secondary school system in a disadvantaged economic background. And we had these core research questions that were addressed in the study. What were the key issues regarding access, barriers, and usage of EdTech by students during school closure? It wasn't really about the supply or the provision of services. It's also about the usage and the whole barrier dimension in between that actually impedes the student and the teachers to make use of this devices or the access already provided by the schools or the government. The second question, research question, is what were the separate and combined effects of delivering teaching at right level? Again, a very globally renowned pedagogical approach invented by Pratham in India and has success story not only in India but also in developing African countries. Again, we used three types of intervention. The first, as I mentioned, was teaching at right level TAR. The second was taking fortnightly assessments from student just to keep them motivated during these school closures and during lockdowns. And the third intervention was the digital training sessions that were imparted online to students and also to the teachers during the COVID period. The third pertinent question was that what did stakeholders identify as the key barriers relating to access to technology for online learning during the school closures? And this study answers all of these questions. So our three interventions, actually the complete set of interventions are 4, especially when we take it in the context of an experimental study. So we implemented these main interventions to enhance the learning outcomes of the students in school during school closures. As I mentioned, we administered the TAL approach for enhancing learning outcome, approach of teacher effectiveness by training them through online digital sessions, and assessment of students just to keep the student motivated. So, and in other intervention, we combined all of the three. In one group, all the 3 interventions were given to the students, and in the rest, the students were given this intervention separately. The sampling framework was that we actually administered the interventions in 12 randomly selected private schools in Bhavalnagar district. And the schools were selected based on their ability to deliver online education, also on schools offering education to especially to grade 7th and 8th students. And we also actually use a gender lens that the school comprised both of boys and girls. In terms of data, we did have certain data limitations because there are total 390 private schools in the district of Bhavalnagar. All the public schools were not able to deliver online. They went to complete closure during COVID. And out of these 390 schools, only a limited number were able to impart online education. And again, we had to see our criteria that they had the gender aspect, and also they had secondary school system, and also that they did deliver online during the COVID. So the sample is limited and scattered, so we randomly picked the random number generation, and that is the approach. And to control for any spillover effect, we actually administered these multiple interventions in different schools and in different union councils of Bhavalnagar district. If you can see, Bhavalnagar district has 5 tehsils. We did this study in all the 5 tehsils. Harunabad, Fortabas, and Minchinabad are economically disadvantaged, whereas Bhavalnagar and Chishtiya is a bit better off as compared to these 3. So we actually covered the entire district for this study and schools in the entire district. Our sample comprised of 258 students, 15 teachers, and 12 schools. From every school, on the average, we picked up 20 students comprising of a gender aspect. And we administered the fortnightly assessment in 2 schools. Then we administered the intervention of digital training sessions in another 2 schools. And in a third set of 2 schools, we actually administered teaching at right level approach. Then there were 2 particular schools where we combined all the 3 interventions, like they were given digital training sessions, they were given the teaching at right level approach, they were given also the assessments. And we had 4 schools as in our control group. So this is very just for understanding what exactly is an RCT experiment study. It's that you divide the population or the sample into 2 different groups. One group gets the treatment, the other group is the counterfactual, or it stays at the status quo. That group doesn't receive any intervention. And before administrating the intervention, a baseline survey is done, which gives insights about the initial conditions of that particular group or sample. And the baseline survey is also done for the control group. And when the interventions are administered for a particular period of time, which are thoroughly monitored, then at the end of intervention, end-line survey is done. And that clearly gives that what was the impact of the interventions on the treated ones, and how there is a difference between the treated ones and the ones that remained as such who actually were in a controlled environment. So this is actually building the counterfactual, and this is actually the gold standard of evidence. Randomized controlled trial, if all the compliance is there, if you have followed all the protocol, it is gold standard of evidence. It only leaves room for the very natural measurement error, and nothing can be far away from reality in that manner. So this is the distribution of the treatment arms, 12 schools divided into different intervention and control groups. We did ensure the protocols of a randomized controlled trial experiment. We actually ensured that there's no selection bias or compositional differences, that all the population, they do have the same socioeconomic characteristics. All the students, they belong to the same socioeconomic profile. The second, that we ensured that there's no iteration bias, that once that we start giving the intervention, there's no change that's happening within the group. There's no movement from the control group to the treatment group of students and vice versa. Then we also ensured that there must not be a pre-existing trend. There must not be some other intervention that is actually defining the impact and not the one that we are giving, or some intervention that happened in past or in recent that is actually creating the impact and not our intervention. So we also ruled that out when in the selection of schools. The last is happening of any concurrent event. So this actually happened when we went to Bhavanagar district and we were actually surveying the students. We found out that the government also started teleschool program, and actually students, especially in urban areas, they were listening to that program, but in South Punjab, there was not much of uptake. But still we controlled for that because we wanted to make sure that any impact that is coming out in the learning levels of children, it is from our intervention and not from the teachings of the teleschool. So what we did is that we distributed evenly the students who were listening to the teleschool program in all our groups. So we also controlled for any alternative explanation of concurrent event. Then we also, to make it more comprehensive, the learning paradigm is not only about the student. The learning paradigm involves the socioeconomic profile of household. It involves the parent or the caregiver behavior and approach, and also the school system. So that is why it was not only the students that we interviewed for the baseline survey. We interviewed the parents of all students. We interviewed the teachers of all these schools, especially grade 8 teacher whose students we were interviewing. And we also interviewed the principal, just to ensure that when we estimate, when we run our model, we are actually focusing on the socioeconomic profile, on the behaviors of the parent. And this is a holistic paradigm that all culminates at the learning level of the school children. And socioeconomic profile, we had a full structured questionnaire on that. It was about household composition, monthly income, information on the asset they own, employment status, type of house, what are the expenses, how number of siblings, age of child, everything. And then we also probed about the access and barriers to EdTech, not only from the parents, but also from the teachers and also from the principal. Like the school principal, they actually mentioned barriers in terms of infrastructure. The teachers mentioned barriers in terms of delivery. And the parents mentioned barriers in terms of owning devices or resources. And also perception matter a lot. And later on, we will just refer to how parents see educational devices, how parents see COVID and its impact on education, and how they see that when a child is at home, what are their behavior and perception toward that child, or what type of role they must play. So now coming to our interventions or how we conducted our experiment. First of all, we are very well aware that there's a grim landscape of learning level in Pakistan, and it has been very rightly pointed out by the ACER reports, and Ma'am Bela will be also joining us online in hours time, But we do have this evidence that a grade 5 student in Pakistan is not able to read a sentence in Urdu or do basic single digit subtraction, or has the learning levels of a grade 2 students. And just another one of the ACER findings few years ago was that 29% of 10-year-old in our primary school system were not able to do single digit subtraction. Now that is very alarming. By single digit subtraction, I mean if you're not able to subtract any number from 1 to 9 out of 9. So grade 5 students, 30% of grade 5 students are not able to do that. So what we did, that we first of all, we administered a standardized ACER tool that is basic foundational skill. It's actually the learning levels of grade 2 to grade 3 students, and we applied it on grade 8 students just to test what kind of learning levels do students have in economically disadvantaged area of South Punjab. So we had very interesting results for that. And after that, once we were done with the ACER tools, we actually applied grade appropriate pencil and paper test in 3 subjects, Maths, Urdu, English. So that grade appropriate test was according to the syllabus of grade 8th of Maths, syllabus of grade 8th Urdu and grade 8th of English that they were actually learning in their own particular classes. So that was our administering both these tests was actually developing a sense of what are their learning levels when we were doing the baseline, and we were actually checking out that before doing an intervention, what are their learning levels. So for the teaching at right level intervention, so what actually STAR, normally the conventional school system is sequential. Like student gets promoted to the next grade after annual exam, and it's not about learning outcome. TAL concept is about that where the learning outcomes matter most, and it's not about sequential progression. It's a scenario where a 12-year-old can be clubbed in the same group of a 7-year-old if they have the same learning outcomes. And then they proceed together and learn, and their learnings are enhanced. So that is the concept behind teaching at right level, that students are actually assessed based on their learning outcomes and not that they will be actually progressed to the next grade sequentially by a matter of design. So after selecting the school for this TAL intervention, we identified weaker students in these schools based on our assessments that we did. And the students were then grouped according to their learning levels in Maths, Urdu, and English. So by weaker students, we meant those students who attained less than 60%. So if a student attained less than 60% in Maths and Urdu, we put that student into a separate Maths group and an Urdu group. And the grouping was done separately for each subject, and a separate instructor with specialization and relevant experience in that subject was assigned to each subject group. So we created groups of weaker students based on the assessment we did, and we assigned a special teacher to that group. And how the TAL experiment worked, how we did that, the instructor, they sent personalized learning material to each group of students that is matched with the learning level of the specific group. It was not way beyond their learning levels, it was not way less their learning levels. Students then received these learning problems. They received a personalized recorded video from the teacher for solving that problem, and web link of these Edtech apps like Study Ladder and Khan Academy, which are used for practicing through WhatsApp messages on weekly basis. So it's an intervention that was launched through WhatsApp, because when we did the survey, we found out there was hardly any ownership of laptop. It's only that nearly majority of the household, they have mobile ownership, smartphone ownership, and that is the only device that they can use, and WhatsApp is the only online medium they can function through. So the teacher was supposed to send them learning material and also the material from these cutting edge educational apps. The students have to solve the problem in due course of time, and they were required to send a picture of the solved problem to the instructor through WhatsApp. Then we also did follow up with parents. The parents get a follow-up call to ask whether the student has solved the problem or not, whether the child needs some additional help. If they needed help, then the student actually communicated through WhatsApp call. And majorly when the study was done, it was majorly school closure period, and there were pockets in between when school opened up. So that was how TAL worked. Further, it was not about just giving them the study material or the problem. It was also the student received quizzes, assessment through a web link of CK12 on weekly basis from the instructor. Again, CK12 is another assessment app, a tech-based assessment app in which online test can be done. We had instructor for Urdu language who created videos, personalized videos for instruction and practice material himself, because there's unavailability of online material on the global apps like Khan Academy and iExcel. After 3 to 4 months of instruction, the students are reassessed in the end line to assess the impact of our intervention on the learning level. So we had their earlier test in hand, and we saw what kind of learnings they have in Urdu, English, and maths. And after giving these intervention for 3 to 4 months, then we will be testing that whether their scores improved in maths, Urdu, and English, and this actually the learning levels. And again, it's a very intricate design. Actually, monitoring and evaluation framework is very detailed and designed. We were present in all the digital sessions, monitoring that the teacher came in. We monitored all the students, whether they were submitting the problem, they were submitting the assessment, what was their level of participation. So RCT comes, it's cumbersome, it comes with time, it comes with cost. We had volunteers. What we did was for TAL that we hired volunteers from a school located in Bahawalnagar, from Bahawalnagar, that has implemented online education using WhatsApp groups and Zoom. So they were already specialized in that domain, more of an outlier school. And they were all using all these cutting edge apps, and they had this ability to match the learning level of students with the quality of the material. So we actually asked them to do this service and actually do this matching, that where student stands in terms of learning level, what type of content should be forwarded to them, and then how it must be monitored and delivered. So just to show you, for example, these are the weekly lessons for TAL mathematics, and it's the lesson, then the video coming in, and then the assessment coming in. And Hamza, can you show this video? I mean, my cursor is not going on that. You should click on the video and just like
conversion of decimals to rational numbers. हम देखते हैं डेसिमल को रैशनल नंबर में किस तरह से
the content.
मिसाल के तौर पर हमारे पास एक डेसिमल हो जैसे 0.1.
Yes, and again, these are the weekly lessons for TAL in English. Again, if you can play the video. The last slide. Yes, on the video, if you can click. So this was how the content was sent on WhatsApp to these students. हो जाएगा इसको 1 मिनट के टाइम में. You can press on play. Okay, I think so. There's some problem. So that was our first core intervention of TAL. The second intervention was of digital training sessions. So the instructor for maths would be on English from selected schools were delivered training on the use of low to high tech apps for the enhanced integration of technology. So we actually selected school teachers from the selected school who were actually teaching to these selected students of grade 8. And we just like had a rundown of multiple tech-based apps. They were taught how to use these apps for improved delivery of instruction material. So for digital training session, we hired resource persons who were all well-versed in implementing and mentoring staff for online education. And these sessions took place through Zoom on fortnightly basis. So 6 sessions were delivered in the following order. You can see it was prep session, then how to actually use Zoom. And it was very surprising that for the first 4 days of the field survey, I was not able to find any teacher in Bahawalnagar district who actually heard the word Zoom. And on the 5th day, I found the first girl who actually knew what a tablet is. So that is the level of lack of awareness or deprivation of technology in South Punjab. So then we delivered a whole session in Microsoft Word and Excel, then Microsoft PowerPoint, how to use that. Then we integrated some high-tech apps like how to use Study Ladder and Khan Academy. And then CK12, that's a very high-powered app for taking tests, and that actually delivers, it's actually automatically scores the assignment and forwards it to the teacher. And then there was a recap session, rather a test session, whether these teachers have learned over time or not. So that was our second intervention. And again, we have some videos of how the Zoom session with the MS Office, how if you can just forward it a bit on the play button. थोड़ा सा फॉरवर्ड कर दी इसको तो ये हाँ जी I guess we're having some, but I mean these all play in my laptop. I don't know. So the third intervention was for the motivation of student, the fortnightly assessment. So again, these teachers who are actually teaching the students in school, they're proper mainstream teachers. They actually send them assessments, online assessments using CK12 app. And again, it comprised of quizzes according to the syllabus that they were reading in the class, whatever material was taught in the school for the last 2 weeks. And web link to the quiz was sent to students through WhatsApp messages and reassessment. Again, we had the plan that we will do a reassessment, the online assessment of students at the end, and we will see whether the schools where this intervention is conducted, do they have any difference in scores? Like, is there any increase in the scores due to this activity that they are continuously engaged in assessment after 14 days? So this is actually the empirical model. I won't go into the details. So this is the regression, how we ran the model. And then we also did exploratory data analysis, and the graphs are the best manner to show what's happening in the landscape of education. And we considered it an appropriate technique, and it provided us good evidence on the differential access girls have concerning technology. So if you can see, this is the graphical representation for our sample for the district of Bahawalnagar. If you see the type of technology, it's primarily the mobile, essentially the smartphone, and then the use of TV. But parents essentially see TV for recreational purposes. They do not have the inclination to see it for any educational purposes. This was very clear during our surveys with the parent. So laptops and tablets, I mean, only the senior members in the family had, and children did not have any access to these devices. And the type of mobile phone, now this is something very interesting, that 73.6% they had smartphone. And this is again, we also learn in social protection that beneficiaries, they do have smartphones. So nearly majority of the household in Pakistan, if they have one thing in common, they have a mobile phone, and that is the point of leverage of intervention in terms of education, in terms of social protection, in terms of multiple interventions that you can think of, because this is one device that is present in 80 to 90% of household in Pakistan. Then this graph, if you can see, again, gender lens was very essential. Girls' education is already a challenge in Pakistan, and they are already deprived. So were either boys or girls given a preference in assessing technology during school closure? So this is what we asked from parents, and the majority of them mentioned equal preference, 130. We were very happy when we learned that. But when we did focus group discussions with teachers at school, they were very clear that parents have implicit bias. They have complete preference toward male child in terms of ownership of device, in terms of access to education, in terms of expenditure, in times of COVID. And due to this implicit bias, they don't reveal it, but this is what all these schools focus group discussion told us. They voiced their opinion in a very hard manner, that the ground reality is that actually they have a very high preference for, and parents they don't want to actually mention it, so they cover it under equal preference. So this was the contradiction that we found out in the data. Another one was that were girls permitted to use devices during school closures? 164 parents said yes, 72 said no, and majority of the 72, they had cultural and religious reasons as two core reasons for not giving devices to a female child. Reasons for not accessing online education during school closure. Again, this is a alarming situation that 35% of schools do not offer any online. As I mentioned, when COVID hit the Bahawalpur district, all these schools and all the public schools, they went to complete closure. So whatever time COVID was around, whatever lockdowns happened, these students from the public schools, they were totally out of the loop of education. And even the private schools, you can see that 35% were not able to deliver, and nearly 46% they did not have any gadgets. It was only the online through WhatsApp or mobile they were able to deliver. So that is the level of deprivation of the Edtech system in disadvantaged province of Pakistan. Mode of online learning used by school. So if you can see that Google Classroom, very little, Zoom, again, less, nearly 20%, and it's all about WhatsApp throughout the district. It's all about WhatsApp. If that smartphone is not there, it's a complete blackout in terms of education for these children. And again, type of online assessment used by school during closure. So 32% use MCQs. Again, MCQs is a very rudimentary measure. It's not the learning to the fullest scale. And problem solving and the short answers, you can see they have a small proportion in this graph. Again, these are the questions done to the students, and it was like, do you enjoy learning through EdTech? And 106 out of the sample of 258, they agreed that yes. So these students, they do have adaptability and potential and willingness to learn through EdTech. It's just that access is not with these students. And we asked them, learning through EdTech is more effective compared to in-class learning. So a very solid disagreement to this. There's no comparison to a classroom learning. I mean, no matter how much EdTech is there, in-person classroom learning can never, it cannot come close to in-person classroom learning. And this is something we asked to parents, what were the negative impacts of the school closure on students? And this is what, this is what we asked to teachers. And this is what they said, that motivation to learn, I'm again wrong about this. This is what we asked to the parents. So parents answered that, 152 answered that the biggest concern was that the motivation to learn was not there. And it also affected their cognitive behavior and levels of literacy. I mean, students were actually unlearning what they learned earlier. It was more of a period where it was negatively impacted, that instead of any enhancement, or it was all downside happening. So these are our main results, that we did find out that teaching at light level intervention, it significantly increased Urdu and English scores, but there was no impact on math scores. And we kind of perceived that because some schools had maths in Urdu and some had maths in English, so some students were not very much comfortable with maths in Urdu and some were vice versa. And a significant and positive intention to treat effect. Again, this is something that how we measure the impact on the treated on a group where we have number of students, and if there's 100% compliance and everyone is learning in that group. However, if there is not 100% compliance in that group, for example, the students are not showing up for tests, they're not submitting the quizzes, and some are learning, some are not learning, then we use another type of method, that is local average treatment effects, that is measuring impact for only the treated ones. and where we leave out the ones who were part of the group, but they kind of refrained from that particular treatment. So again, from the late local average treatment effects, we found out the students who were rigorously complying or attending that positive and significant improvements in Urdu and English scores. And fortnightly assessments and digital training sessions also indicated improvements in English scores of the treatment group. So all majorly TAL stood out the most, that it does enhances learning levels if this particular treatment is given to children. And we have evidence that even if it is given in after school hour, it enhances learning levels. So if you can see these plot graphs, these are the English and math score. Just for your convenience, these blue ones are for the control group, the group that doesn't receive any treatment. So these were the scores in English before for the control group and before COVID came in. And these are the scores for the same after when we did the N9, and you can see that the scores, they are decreasing. But if you can see that this is the combined group where we gave all the 3 interventions. So this was their score at the time of the baseline that we did the survey, and this is after giving the treatment. So if you can see, this red box is higher than the blue one, so their score did improve. Again, for TAL, you can see this was the score when we did the baseline survey, and this was the score when we did the N9, and again the scores are higher over here. You can see it for a fortnightly assessment, you can see it for digital training section. Everything is going up in the red boxes, so scores are improving with all the 3 interventions, but the highest effects are for TAL. And again, these are the results for the math score, and we kind of see that since control group did not receive any, so they're going down a bit, slightly down. But again, for combined, you can see the difference that they're going up, they're going up, they're going up. And BTS didn't work out. The digital training session didn't work out for mathematics. Maybe it's difficult to deliver online. These are the Urdu scores, and again, the same phenomena as of English, that all the boxes going up after giving the interventions. These are just some tables, complicated ones. I will rather skip in the interest of time. So these are our empirical regressions and the models for the intention to treatment effect and local average treatment estimates, 2 models that we employed, but the results I've already shared with you. So the key findings, what the findings signify. The study found a positive and significant impact of attending online classes. So another finding, that a positive and significant impact of attending online classes due to school closure on students' maths and English score. And we also learned that students from high income, a bit slightly, I mean, the socioeconomic profile was seen, but since we had a bit of difference in Chishtiya and the Havanagar profile as compared to Fort Abbas and other. Fort Abbas is just next to the border. I mean, we were doing survey and we found out that we have reached the Indian border, so we had to come back. So students from high income households also scored significantly high scores in maths and English than students from low income households. Again, a very basic evidence that we have. We also did key informant interviews, and I'm extremely grateful to FCDO Office Pakistan, to Ideas Think Tank Lahore, and multiple local stakeholders from the Bahawalnagar district. And we actually, these tailored interviews from the very relevant professionals in these areas, and also from International Development Network operating in Pakistan. And we asked them these particular, we asked them about these particular areas, the landscape of education in Pakistan during COVID-19 pandemic, especially from the development sector, what were their approaches. The question of adaptability of EdTech by the target group, the students, teachers, and parents, not only the advantaged one, but also the deprived ones. Barriers in the use of EdTech, especially in the deprived areas. Impact of COVID on learning levels, and the role and response of government and key players in relation to EdTech. What was the stimulus or the package that government announced for these at school level for these schools and for these areas, and future priorities for EdTechs. What should come in? What is the way forward? What needs to be learned from the evidence and from the experience of 2020, 2021, and now that it's a new normal? So these are again some relevant question again, we were enlightened by FCDO that equity ratio is critical. As study shows, I mean, other studies also shows that 90% students have access to TV schooling, but only 43% watch regularly. And parents do not see TV as an education learning tool. For them, it's a recreational tool. We need to develop digital tools for children in that regard. And again, our probe about the intervention of TAL and the stakeholders mentioned, and these are actually the researchers from IDEAS, that we need to focus more and more on teaching and learning course in the classroom, and it's teaching at right level is a priority for us. There was even recommendation from a very high-powered stakeholder that TAL must be part of school syllabus at public school level and at private school level. The segregation must be done on learning levels and not on just sequential progress to grades. Even if you see the data sets of Pakistan, how education variables are mentioned, it is enrollment in primary level, enrollment at secondary level, and number or millions of children are mentioned. But this does not signify learning levels. It's not learning level based. A child of 12-year-old may have learning levels of grade 1, but that data doesn't speak of that, and it conceals that information. So, one very strong recommendation was to suspend the national curriculum for 1 or 2 years and redesign it as per the learnings of COVID, as per the needs of COVID, and not to continue with the same syllabus because it's not aligned with the dynamics. So, policy implications from this study that we came at was actively involving school actors in the design of the tech-assisted TAL intervention. It's important for the long-term buy-in of teachers and students. Second is understanding the complexities involved when it comes to implementing tech-assisted teaching at right level intervention, and how this can impact their level of success is the key. Third is considering factors relating to access and use of devices beyond device ownership alone is essential. I came across a number of students, certain number of students who had laptops, but they never knew how to use it. Its usage, even they cannot even access internet because they do not know how to connect. And community perceptions of technology must be factored into the planning of any technology-supported education program. So the first thumb rule of evidence that it has to be contextual. The context matters. The community perception matters. If TV is not seen as an educational tool, no matter how many hours of program of multiple subjects are run by government, it won't catch the attention because community does not perceive it in that manner. Last slide, I won't take.
Things may have gone a little technical in the middle of the presentation, but I think in line with your methodology, of course, which is very rigorous, things had to be presented in the way, of course, a scientific study demands. So I think a couple of very important things on which we'll probably build in the later part of the session, including, of course, the incidence of unlearning, the implicit bias, which you mentioned in favor of the male child. And probably the third important thing that I picked up was that EdTech is not just about the access and barriers to technology, it's about the ecosystem as well. So thank you very much. And I have other notes as well, which we can go through. But we now have 4 very distinguished panelists that we want to turn to. And my first panelist for her special remarks would be Susan Nicolai, who will be joining us online.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here and have really appreciated hearing the presentation again from Faria on the study that SDPI implemented in Pakistan. Edtech Hub supported this intervention, and we've had quite extensive collaboration throughout. So it's really exciting to hear the full overview. I want to share with you now some remarks both regarding the state of evidence in relation to EdTech and give an overview of a number of studies that the Edtech Hub has supported during the COVID-19 period, of which this study is one of them globally. Can folks see my presentation here? I'm just getting this set up.
Yes, we can see this.
You can see that. Great. So I'll start first just telling you a little bit about Edtech Hub. It's a global research partnership bringing together a number of different consortium partners and is supported by the UK Foreign and Commonwealth, the FCDO. It's supported by the Gates Foundation and by UNICEF, along with a partnership with the World Bank. Our goal is to empower people by giving them evidence they need to make decisions about technology and education. We're here because technology definitely has the potential to help solve the global learning crisis, but that potential is not being realized. And we would posit that this is partially due to some of the gaps in evidence and gaps in use of evidence. So what does the evidence say around use of EdTech? There is a lot of detailed evidence about particular interventions and limited synthesis and analysis of that evidence and limited applicability as one looks at moving to scale with use of EdTech. So there's three areas where we're focused on in Edtech Hub, and they center around first the learning crisis and the fact that 9 out of every 10 children in low-income countries are at a disadvantage in terms of both literacy and numeracy. And we know that this crisis has gotten worse due to COVID-related school closures. But as I was saying, independent impact evaluations of EdTech interventions, which grew expansively during the COVID response, impact evaluations are few. So we don't know generally how much change, how much effectiveness is there in terms of the impact of EdTech interventions. A second area of evidence gaps centers around scale. And we know that access to digital technologies is increasing. We heard from Faria how extensive mobile phones are throughout Pakistan, for instance, and that expansion is matched in most other places in the world. However, the systematic use of tech for learning, for education purposes by both schools and families is just beginning. And I think we saw a huge expansion of that again during COVID, but it was very ad hoc. It depended on usual individual actors and their drive to make things happen, and limited systematic use. And then the third area around an evidence gap centers around cost effectiveness. The EdTech sector is growing quickly, with billions and billions predicted to be invested in it and for it to be worth. Government education sector plans, including in Pakistan, increasingly use EdTech. but the decisions about which ed tech and how cost effective those are very difficult to come by because cost data is often not shared or standardized in terms of interventions. So these three evidence gaps are areas that we're very much focused on at Edtech Hub in terms of improving learning at scale in a cost-effective way. And to do this, we're aiming to create an evidence-driven future of EdTech that's involving currently a research portfolio of around 7 million USD that we're investing in evidence generation around 5 priority topic areas, which I'll come to in a moment, 6 focus countries. We have completed 10 COVID-19 research studies that were relatively small scale and short term, and we're currently operationalizing 13 additional primary research studies. Our research portfolio is focusing on 5 priority topics. These include teacher continuous professional development, digital personalized learning, participation and messaging, data for decisions, and girls' education and technology. And these 5 areas were chosen as focus for us because both of their potential for impact, what we already knew in terms of evidence in these areas, but a recognition that the scale of that evidence, the rigor of that evidence was often lacking. They also are 5 areas that national governments and donors are particularly interested in. We have taken an approach where we look at these 3 areas of evidence around learning outcomes, cost effectiveness, and scalability. And we're both looking at generating evidence and then moving that evidence into practice. And we do that through a combination of research, innovation, and technical assistance. So there's a range of things that we're active in terms of the Edtech Hub. And the research area is where I focus and where I'm going to talk a bit more, particularly about what we have done and what we learned from the C19 research. Our focus countries are these 6, with Pakistan being one of them, and thus the support for the study that has just been shared. However, the hub actually, through its technical assistance and help desk, is working globally and engaged in learning about EdTech and supporting EdTech ecosystems really across the globe. So the research that we have supported during COVID-19 and what we've learned from that process. So in terms of background, everyone is clearly aware of the level of school closures during the COVID pandemic and the fact that these were really unprecedented. We also know that this worsened the learning crisis with all estimates around learning poverty showing that there have been some major increases due to those closures. Now, our work at the Hub, we launched in early 2020, just before the COVID pandemic. And so that when the pandemic hit, that entailed pivoting a lot of the plans we had around large scale research and moving quickly to try to support evidence generation in the context when schools were closed around the globe, offices were closed, and there were a lot of constraints in terms of research and and need for adapting research approaches to be more remote. We put together a call for small-scale short-term research grants in this context with a set of criteria that link to some of the framing that I shared above around the work with the Edtech Hub. And had a range of projects, range of actors apply, and 10 projects were selected, of which the SDPI study was one. And then the work and the research was carried out through 2021, largely, most throughout last year. So this is a bit of an overview of the studies that we did have. There were 10 primary research studies with 10 country partners. The countries you can see there on the slide. In addition to Pakistan, studies were conducted in Bangladesh, Kenya, Ghana, and Sierra Leone. Through those studies, there were 6 tech-based approaches that were really looked at. That included audiovisual lessons, IVR, or interactive voice recognition audio lessons over phones, text messages and WhatsApp messages, social media and digital apps, data systems development, and digital platforms. I think the vast majority of the studies did focus on and use text messages as one element of their studies. And that was partly based, I think, on the prevalence of messaging and WhatsApp in some of the contexts. There were 3 main types of devices: radio, TV, and mobile and smartphones. A range of learners and teachers reached, and 4 emergent themes that these studies have told us something about. And these match up largely to some of the themes that the Hub is working on as well, around learners, parents and caregivers, teachers, and girls. Here is an overview of some of the studies. You can see the SDPI Pakistan study mentioned there in the lower right. But you can also see here a whole range of partners that conducted the studies around the world, and the themes and the types of studies that were there. And all of this information as well is available on the Edtech Hub website if you're interested to look at some of the studies in more detail. All of the studies are published now with detailed findings, and we are just in the process of getting a synthesis paper completed, and that should be out within the next month or 2. And I'd like to now just share some of the headline findings that will be included in that synthesis paper. We analyze these 10 studies looking across research approaches to better understand what type of research was being done in these contexts, findings on main themes, and then cross-cutting factors and effectiveness. In terms of the research approaches that were used, one of the things that we really tried to look at carefully across the studies and to better understand were what types of measures are being used in EdTech effectiveness. And they roughly fall into these 5 different categories. So across some of the studies, including the one you've just heard, there were measures around changes in learning outcomes. And that included looking at measures around how many students were learning and by how much across what subjects. And alongside that, there were some studies as well that looked at improved teacher knowledge for how many teachers and by how much. There were about 5 of the 10 studies that actually looked at changes in learning outcomes in any rigorous kind of way. And we think that is because of the difficulty of actually gathering the evidence, gathering the data around changes in learning outcomes and the short-term nature of the studies. But this is an area that we really need to see brought in across the board in terms of EdTech effectiveness and studies on it. A second type of measure that was pretty common across the studies was around engagement and content. And that looked at things like rate of lesson completion, rate of increase in student engagement, their level of effort, their attitude, and the rate of change in parental beliefs was also an element that was measured in some studies. Thirdly, there were measures around levers to access and use of EdTech. So this took a closer look at barriers and enablers to EdTech access and use. So things like impact of caregiver decision-making on use of EdTech were looked at. And I think we heard how some of those measures might have been used in Faria's presentation of the SDPI study. Fourthly, there were measures around group-based variations and how the EdTech intervention affected groups of different income, gender, and disability. And this looked particularly, the impact side of this was difficult to measure. There was much more that we were finding in terms of measures on things like reach, but the impact side was few and far between in the studies. And then finally, the fifth type of measure that we found in the studies included looking at perceptions and awareness of EdTech. So that looked at users' views of EdTech and knowledge and social awareness of EdTech, which in some contexts was very problematic. Finally, in terms of the measures side of things, I wanted to highlight that cost effectiveness has been highlighted as a key measure in terms of evidence gaps in research, but across these studies, we didn't see much on cost effectiveness. And again, in talking to and working with the researchers, we think that was partly because of time and resource constraints, but also due to lack of guidance and standardization to even know what data to be gathering in terms of cost effectiveness. So that was a major gap that we identified. In terms of the thematic findings across the studies, these really came out in 4 different areas, and we did a coded process of identifying thematic findings that cut across studies. And the number of studies that touched on learners, you can, and each of the themes you can see at the top of the slide. So there were 8 out of 10 studies that actually had something to say in terms of EdTech and learners. There were a number of findings, a few that I would highlight, and I won't discuss every point here due to time, but for instance, there was a finding across a number of studies that there really is no uniform way that EdTech is accessed in resource poor households. And what some of the studies were saying around the difference in access and engagement was there were dependencies around having strong school leaders who embraced an intervention, around sharing a schedule and having widespread awareness of that. And obviously access to devices and platforms was a major issue as well. Another example of a thematic finding was around inequality in girls and boys EdTech access and use, but there were different findings in self versus observational differences. So several studies asked parents, asked families about their own practices in terms of access from a gender lens. And from those self-reported findings, they were often seen as fairly equitable, but then questions were asked as well about what they saw in the community. And that's where the real differences were, where often favoring of boys' access was identified. And be interesting to understand a little bit more if how that plays out in Pakistan and whether there's self versus observational differences are apparent, or if there are clear preferences that match. In terms of teachers, a finding centered around EdTech enhancing inclusive teacher professional development, and with several of the studies showing that the majority of teachers highlighted an intervention really increasing their confidence to undertake online learning, but then also to use that in the future in terms of blended learning. And then finally, one other message that I would like to, one other finding I'd like to highlight was around messaging. And that was seen as really promising, but not having consistent effects on engagement of parents or learners. And some of the differences that were found were based on socioeconomic status. And parents that had some level of education found messaging as helpful and useful in terms of increasing engagement, whereas parents that had little to no education found it off-putting and actually disengaging. And I think there's things that we're still wanting to look at, and we have some research that is trying to look at and better understand the differences in terms of how messaging is perceived and used by different groups. And finally, there's a side note here around data. We only had one of our 10 studies focused on data and data systems, and that was in Sierra Leone. So one can't really posit a broader application than just what happened in terms of research on data systems in Sierra Leone. But that study did find a significance of socioeconomic over health factors in determining access, determining EdTech access, which was quite interesting in the COVID environment versus there was some comparisons there with what had happened during Ebola. So those are some of the headlines on thematic findings. I'll quickly run through, I think I'm reaching my time, but I'll run through now what this has meant in terms of cross-cutting factors as well. When one looked at findings and the recommendations that were coming out across the studies, there was a sense that EdTech definitely has the potential to strengthen the continuity of learning in low resource environments. But there is a whole set of factors that are critical in enabling that. And if one starts at the bottom of this chain, this spiral, the base resourcing of devices and connectivity being in place is absolutely critical. And really across the studies as a whole, that was highlighted as an excluding factor, as a necessary factor, but not sufficient for effectiveness of EdTech. Then if one moves up this spiral, a critical chain of connections between teachers, parents, and caregivers are important for enabling EdTech effectiveness. Co-design and personalization with informing users being part of product development was highlighted as important. The importance and the potential of blended learning, bringing together tech-based and in-person approaches was flagged in a number of the studies. And again, we heard from Faria a few minutes ago how the learners in her study really highlighted that EdTech in and of itself was not enough. And so blended learning is really a direction that EdTech ecosystems need to go and support. And then finally, collaborative efforts promoting awareness raising are really essential. And there was definitely findings around the lack of awareness of EdTech opportunities being a barrier to their reach. Finally, a set of takeaways and highlights around where one needs to go in terms of further work on evidence. The first centers around a holistic lens on learning, and the fact that wider elements of learning from an ecosystem approach really deserve attention in terms of EdTech effectiveness. It's not just about the technology in and of itself, but needs to encompass elements of pedagogy, curriculum, interface with teachers and facilitators, etc. A second takeaway centers around human-centered designs and approaches. And this is an area that really is embraced by digital and technology developers and needs to sit centrally in EdTech in terms of how it's used and adapted. And so both involving users in the design and the development as well as the adaptation of technology is important. Community as being key in delivery came out really strongly across a number of studies, and it's not just about reaching the learner, but those around the learner, including parents and family, but also other members of the community, and often bringing together learners in communities, even as they're using technology, seem to improve the impact of learning. And then finally, a fourth takeaway centers around the need for comparable measures. So we started by highlighting the gaps in evidence in terms of EdTech effectiveness. But in order to really fill those gaps, there is a need for better understanding of the measures of EdTech and more standardization and facilities for sharing findings for when impact evaluations and other analysis happens. So I will leave it there. I think the focus that we really are centered on at Edtech Hub is around the future of education. And I think that that's one of the exciting elements around the embracing EdTech within education systems, within personalized learning in families. But to make it most effective, this culture of evidence really needs to be strengthened. And I think that the SDPI study is a really strong example of a deep and rigorous evidence approach to a particular intervention. So there's a lot to be learned there. I will leave it there.
Thank you, Susan. I really appreciate the very comprehensive presentation, and thank you for educating us. I think there are some very significant points which you have mentioned as takeaways. And while, of course, I don't want to take time in summarizing them, but some of them will have, of course, a bearing on our discussion in the later half. I think I particularly like the appreciation that there are gaps in evidence, and as you said, that there are gaps in use of evidence as well. So I think that's a point very well taken. And I think one could benefit from the slide that you showed around the learnings from the 6 different countries. And probably I was hoping that at some point we could have a learning event where not just Pakistan, but other countries are also able to present, given that the challenges around the ecosystem would be very same. At least that's the prior expectation. One can, of course, be corrected, or one can learn if, for example, that's not true. Then I think one of your thematic findings was very important, where you showed the significance of socioeconomic factors over health factors in determining access. So again, household level economics or community level economics really matters over here when one talks about the significance of socioeconomic characteristics. And then I think the co-design and personalization part was very important, and maybe once we open up this discussion to our colleagues in this hall, one would really like to learn if partners in the government would be prepared for co-design and personalization, or at least being partners in the co-design effort. I do see that one of our panelists, Mr. Sam Wilson, has joined us in the hall, so if I can invite him to join us on the head table. So, and Dr. Sajid Amin is here, and if he's also available, we could invite both of them here. So with this, let me now move to our next distinguished panelist, Ms. Bela Raza Jami. She's joining us online.
Good afternoon, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.
Ji, walaikum assalam. Ji, we can hear you, Ji.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to start with some confessions. There were no flights from Balochistan to come to Karachi, so I took a 14-hour journey by road last night and reached at 8 in the morning. I did try to look at the details of the report and to do justice to the comments that I will make on this report that SDPI has done. But and I really appreciate Susan's presentation and the framing of the entire initiative on EdTech, which started during COVID and has come a long way indeed. I did wanted to start with a couple of comments from our latest ASER findings of the 2021 National Rural Study, and I underscore rural, of 152 districts. Because one of the questions that we asked from the students was, how did you manage learning during this period, and what were your main sources of support? And what was very exciting was to see that suddenly houses came alive during COVID, and they said the highest was, more than 65% said it was family who gave them support. So a very big myth buster that where homes are seen as passive and non-supportive, COVID showed that in fact that's not so. So people who sit and design interventions and research, etc., need to see what this home environment and family support means. The second highest level of support came from tele-school, the third from whoever had any technology in the form of smartphones and whatever they could download from there. And then finally, radio was in fact at the lowest. I wanted to say this because when we are looking at data of this kind, we look at, all right, if this kind of information is coming from the students and the learners themselves. And when we're talking about learners, we're talking about a data set going up to 90,000 households, about 260,000 assessments, etc. So it is a very reassuring kind of a data set which shares trends that need to be looked upon for evidence to decide on how do we look at the EdTech opportunity. And this has been what I've been saying to the government, let's bridge the homeschool gap. Let's look at the technology opportunities as well, not of course undermining the other aspects of social emotional learning and life skills, etc., for what Susan is calling holistic learning, etc., the reference to holistic learning. My second set of concerns and comments are I needed some clarity at the outset, or will actually share my position on what TAL means to me and what TAL means in the study. Teaching at the right level, as very well elaborated in the study, is essentially about foundational literacy and numeracy. And essentially, it is a time-bound, a very short period of intensive, rigorous, disciplined engagement of language and literacy. In Pakistan, we've done it as Chalo Padho Padho, which is in Urdu, Sindhi, English, and also arithmetic. But those are very rigorous 1 hour cycles of engagement over 60 days. It could be anywhere from 45 to 60 days with a baseline, midline, endline. We have also converted some of that into WhatsApp messages and other small digital pieces too. But in this case, where we are looking at teaching at the right level, and I was quick to ask my colleagues in the People's Action for Learning Network, including the pioneers of this approach this morning, as to whether it has been done at middle levels. They informed us, and this is just so that if we build on this study, we should be able to do it with a sense of, okay, where does the knowledge and the skill exist to be able to scale it up, to look at the evidences and outcomes of such an intervention. So from my entire knowledge partners, what we are seeing is that only Philippines has tested middle levels, but actually abandoned for the teaching at the right level. And therefore, I think it is important to see that if in this study and intervention, experimental work, we decided to take a jump from foundational literacy and numeracy, which is up to grade 3 level. We jumped to middle grades. How did we actually go through all those steps? And then how did we decide to use a particular kind of technology? So I think that's extremely important to acknowledge from my end, that teaching at the right level also comes with a combined maximized learning approach, where there is a very systematic approach of the teacher or a facilitator sharing the learning nugget, then letting groups work together, and that is physical groups working together, or shared kind of reading or arithmetic, and then they go through an individualized phase of testing the same learning content or nugget on that same day. So it's a very fast and rigorous cycle of the teacher, a warm-up period, which is social emotional learning, followed by the teacher demonstrating or sharing the nugget to be learned, followed by group learning, and then finally rounded off by individual mastery of whatever that practice is. Now, that's the way the science of TAL is. And so I think it is important to see that if, and my question is that if we decided to go with a middle grade and a very truncated or a different way of doing it, I was really keen to understand who were the knowledge partners of this. I know there is reference to the ASA tools and obviously the adaptation for grade 8 level students. So this is a very big concern, but I think the government of Pakistan is very keen to explore ways and means of looking at accelerated learning, which is looking at accelerated learning through the teaching at the right level approach with the evidence that is there. We have got 3 sets of evidence too. One from the JPAL that is just coming out, one from Opera, another third party which has done the work on teaching at the right level, but combined with social emotional skills, that extra bits that Susan just spoke about, which is looking at more holistic learning, and then another third study. I'd be happy to share that. But I think that my concern is that, and this is also with Rukmini Banerjee, we had long talks on to what extent can the TAL approach be totally digitized. In some part, we've seen that for the SMS messages, for again, the foundational literacy and numeracy has been done very successfully in Botswana, where the SMS messages to a whole host of families and children were passed on, and then that became the basis for the measurement of learning gains in arithmetic and numeracy. And there's a lot of work that has come out of that as well. So the question is the kind of technology, the level at which we are stretching TAL to at grade 8, the precedents for that and the processes for that. That definitely needs to be filled up, and it'll be great if we can get that. Number two, to decide on what kind of technology from low to high tech will work best, and then to see whether the measurement, the way the normally TAL measurement is always baseline with midline and end line, but whatever measurement we do, we need to be able to see that there has been some reasonable engagement with the facilitators and the learners themselves, so that we can come up with very robust data on the policy implications, and also the kind of conundrum that we are in, both at the, well, actually for all SDG 4.1.1a, which is lower primary, for upper primary and lower secondary A, B, and C. So this is what my comments would be on this, and to see how we can bring it into finally into a larger conversation with the government. The government right now in its sector plans and its policies for alternative learning, for non-formal education, it's calling it non-formal education or non-formal education, but perhaps we need to look at other ways of describing it. But for looking at accelerated pathways, we need to ensure right now, because policies like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is finalizing it. I believe Sindh is also finalizing its policy. Maybe Punjab has got one, but we need to revisit some of that, that it has enough space for these 3 or 4 different ways of accelerated learning with EdTech approaches as well. Currently, the policies which are just being done under the local education group, under the sector plan of KP, has got very little space for EdTech, and similarly others. So maybe SDPI and the EdTech initiatives through this study and perhaps studies to come must be able to influence the policies that are being finalized, so that we have room to implement innovations and to see how we can get the kind of data and the processes leading to that, those learning gains, which have come out very positively, at least for 2 of the competencies, can be a part of the system's own intelligence, and to be able to look at solutions from a policy and financing point of view. And Susan well mentioned the issue of costing. We do need to see how much does it cost. So for example, if our solution of TAL for lower primary, or actually any age group who has left or never been enrolled, dropped out or never been enrolled, whether they are at primary age group or middle age group or even secondary age group, it comes to 4,000 rupees, whatever that may be. That is sort of less than $20. But that's the costing for the 60-day session for teaching at the right level for foundation literacy and numeracy. And I do want to share that the Transforming Education Summit is a great opportunity next month, where one of the 5 thematic action tracks is about precisely on digital learning and transformations, and the third one on learning and skills for life, work, and sustainable development. And of course, the support to teachers and safe and healthy institutions, and financing above all. But the call to action that has also come just yesterday, finalized, is also a very important one. So today's session and the study and whatever recommendations we are coming with must be locally, have an influence on the local policies being decided on alternative learning pathways and accelerated learning. Number 2, of course, at the national level. And number 3, I think the voice from here should go to the call for action for foundational learning, which is a desperate need across the world, as if 9 out of 10 children cannot read at age 10 with understanding. There is a huge, more than an emergency right now. It's a colossal tragedy that is happening. But I really thank SDPI for the work they have done. I will be happy to follow up with more conversations on this, on the technical side of it, and to see how we can look at the work that Idara Talim-e IT has done on TAL at foundation learning and numeracy, spanning now almost 300,000 learners, many of them well tested, and to see tremendous success and to be able to push government to adopt it at a scale pace, and perhaps moving towards middle levels as well on an experimental basis. But it'll be good to have our larger knowledge partners on TAL also become a party to this. I'd be very happy to join hands with SDPI on behalf of my organization and the People's Action for Learning Network to see how we can take this forward so that we can have more rigorous interventions with better evidence, and also evidence which helps us to learn further in this particular area of the intervention and accelerated learning, which by and large always produce some great results. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Bela Raza Jamil, for your very important and insightful interventions. And thank you for joining us after a very long and arduous drive all the way from Balochistan. So we really value your participation. And I think the points which you have mentioned, and of course, we are grateful for you to offer collaboration, which we'll happily uptake, I'm sure, given the kind of data that you have maintained and collected over the years. And I think there were some aspects around the methodology which I'll request Dr. Friha to maybe respond to or clarify during the open discussion. Your point around measurement and that it requires engagement between learners and facilitators is probably extremely, it's timely and need of the hour, certainly. And yes, there's a team of ours engaged with KP government's education department. So your point is well noted when you say that the sector plan being prepared by the KP education department has a lesser edtech element. We'd certainly take it up with them and pass on this advice and your guidance to them. With this, let me now turn to—
I just wanted to clarify, it's the policy which is just being finalized, which is called the non-formal education policy, in which does not embrace this element. And I worry that it will just, the time period window will close and we will not have our foot in when it comes to teaching at the right level kind of approaches. So that's my request, that I think it should be there.
Agreed. Thank you and well noted. Let me now turn to Dr. Nasir Mahmood Saab. Sir, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this very pertinent, very relevant discussion. Primarily on the research we have just conducted, but generally speaking, an area on which we all are working in the country and around the globe as well, trying to understand what technology can contribute and how it can be utilized to the benefit of student learning. Before starting any point on the research, I would like to appreciate the efforts of Dr. Saiba, Dr. Friha and her team for a very rigorous effort to bring to us some of the very key findings of the things which relates not only to the particular area where they did research, but to more than 50% of the Pakistan where almost similar situation prevail, similar conditions of education prevail. There's no doubt that after COVID, our attention has really been diverted to making this online education, this edtech possibilities, a useful thing for promoting education. And at times, I feel that we go to the things which personally I believe are beyond the scope of this technology intervention. But this is the way we proceed in research, that once you start attending an area of research, and we being very optimistic in the beginning, try to link things with those interventions which are basically beyond the scope of that. And we'll come to the point in a moment again, Ji. I will not be very thoroughly going into the methodological part of the research because it takes a lot of time. And as Dr. Saiba said earlier, Dr. Bela Raza, that we can have some sessions on technical part of the study if you would like to talk about its methodology, the way it was conducted, the way the teaching methodologies were used in it. But if I directly come to the important points which came to my notice during her presentation, and looking at the summary of the findings which I saw, I always feel that because we're doing a lot of research in these days for the last 2 years, many different organizations are involved, and we have a large database now. And I feel that some of the studies, we find few things which apparently are contrary to our findings in some other studies of similar nature. We really need to look, for example, if I'll say that they say that high preference for boys over girls. But when we go to the figures in our national database, like data produced by MIX over last 10-20 years, MIX study surveys, like our national assessment surveys, which are not primarily on this, but we have one of the elements on gender parity in that, and other researches, it tells us that gender parity in terms of enrollment of students in school is getting better over years. But with certain specific studies, it always appears that it is not actually the way it is being reported in other data sets. So we need to actually really conclude, because it has implications for us. Are we really improving? Because we have been focusing on this gender parity issue, I suppose, for a number of years now, and a lot of efforts have been done. Are we not improving in it? Which figures are correct to us, and how do we trust them when they are presented to us? So we need that. This needs to be looked into. Another important thing, we said that household SES have an impact, significant impact on students' achievement, and that's what being supported by. I've been doing secondary analysis of mixed data from 2011 to 18, and very rightly it says that wealth quintiles they have made, and they have a significant effect on a provision of facilities for enabling education, not learning itself, but the tools which are associated to learning, which help you to improve learning. And that subsequently showed some effect on achievement of students. But we actually couldn't find a direct relationship between these two. That was an implied relation, which we inferred, and by implied, I mean there can be other hundreds of factors which contribute, and we couldn't segregate them. So this again is a very important thing for us to know, that how can we directly relate these SES, household SES, to the student achievement empirically? What kind of evidence do we need to connect them? Again, another very important, interesting thing was TV is not seen as a source of education, and that to personal experience is also true. But at the same time, Ministry of Education in the last week signed an agreement to open 4 new television educational TV channels. During COVID, we have teleschool, and we spend billions of rupees on it during COVID. If it is not effective, it's not delivering to us. Does this make sense that in one forum we are talking about TV, our evidence telling us that TV is no more a relevant source, and on another forum on the same day we are signing an agreement to open dozens of new television channels and spending a huge amount on it from a loan which we have taken from World Bank. So we need to, this is the right time to disseminate such things with clear evidence that should we be investing in that or not. It says that Dr. Sabha pointed out very explicitly that schooling should be on the basis of students' existing learning levels. That can be an interesting thing to do. Dr. Bela has already talked about the idea behind it, because I also agree that the terminology, wherever it is used, it says it's for numeracy and literacy in the early grades. But this kind of technique, this kind of way, if you use it at a national level, and we suspend our system of schooling, which is obviously a sequential way of moving ahead, then wherever I have studied, this technique is usually associated to short-term ALP kind of projects, where you have a short intervention, a rigorous intervention to bring people at par, and then you streamline, then you bring them to the mainstream education, rather than as a main educational system anywhere. But if there is an idea behind it with Dr. Sabha and team, I would suggest with this recommendation, please give a strategy to do that, because it requires an overhauling of the whole system and bringing the system to a basics which is not prevalent anywhere in the world. So let's see how it can work for us or it will not. Again, it was very with that same point associated with suspension of curriculum for certain years, because we're going through an emergency, and it's true that our students have a lot of learning losses in last 2-3 years. So what actually is the mechanism behind this? Once we suspend what we're doing today, what we will be doing in place of it, and how we'll make it workable. So we need to have some more insight into this idea of using this technique for making up those learning losses which we suffered in the years. But leaving aside these specific findings of the study, some generalized takeaways for me is, for not only specific to this study, but to whatever research we are doing right now, we need to be very, very clear and specific in relating our evidences to our conclusion. We collect evidences which are sometimes very convincing on the face, but when we conclude it and contextualize them, we need to be very careful, because it has a lot of implications for system changes required in the system to implement them. And once done, very hard to undo them once they are in place. If they are in place just by not really carefully looking into implications, but just recommending, and somebody take it seriously and start changing the system accordingly, it has a lot of impacts on the system itself. So we all need to, for example, it says, one of the finding was saying that this technique was very useful for students who were studying English in terms of improving their achievement, and not similarly good or significantly good for the students of mathematics. One point which makes sense to me is mathematics is difficult to teach online because of the gadgets it does provide us to write down equations and all those things. So maybe one of the reasons. But when I say that this is good for English, it is not good for geography. It is good for geography. It is not good for improving achievement in mathematics or science. I need to explain it well, that how have I concluded, what difference actually exists which make it good for improving achievement in one subject and not good in improving achievements of a subject of similar nature. So maybe I need to make sure that there's no other factor which actually was behind it, and I'm associating it to something which is not directly relevant to it. So that will bring us to some trouble. Whenever it comes to technology, I understand EdTech is one of the fastest growing fields in computers. In Pakistan, I was just preparing a proposal a few days ago. There are more than 350 EdTech companies which emerged during the last 2 years, and they are now producing materials for teaching online. They're all registered firms. I'm not talking about unregistered firms. So this has a lot of potential. This industry is growing. The people in this industry are mainly from technology side of it. They are computer scientists who are doing all that. Most of them are programmers or otherwise, but having very little background in education. So they're good at making the interfaces friendly, making things accessible, but whatever is made accessible through these forums need to be academically sound and need to be directly connected to the curriculum we are having nowadays. that connection I feel at times is missing. So when we talk about the potential of educational this EdTech, we need to keep in mind, are we talking about replacing the existing system with a tech-based system? Or are we talking about EdTech being one of the supportive things in taking forward our education system? I believe replacement is not the thing we are actually serious about. What we are serious about is that whatever education systems do we have, this will be supplementing our efforts in order to make it more effective. And in this context, we need to put our things. Again, one last thing I would like to mention here is that there needs to be a forum where all these findings needs to be synthesized. When we work in bits and pieces in our own silos, sometimes very important things are missed out. Sometimes overlap of the work is going on, and at several points our research, which we call as evidence-based, and our evidences tell us contrary things to do. So we need to synthesize it at some point of time before investing our money into it, before bringing any substantial change to our systems. For this, I am not sure which forum can be the right place to do it, but this is something we need to take seriously, because we're spending borrowed money on it. Most of the time we're spending loan money on these efforts. We don't have dollars to spend on it. And when we are spending, we need to make sure that we get maximum out of it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll stop here. Thank you, Dr. Saab.
Thank you, Dr. Nasir Saab. I think some very important points, and thank you for your feedback on the study as well, both methodology and the findings. I think you're spot on when you say that the way studies, findings or recommendations should be taken up by the policymakers, that requires care and that requires further consultation. Maybe it's an iterative process that one has to follow. And that's a very important point you've made. You also highlighted the growth in EdTech industry and the fact that it's driven by a very vibrant IT ecosystem, which needs to engage with the educationists in the country to make it full circle. And yes, ultimately, of course, EdTech has to be a complementing tool to all other forms of education that are available, learning that are available rather. So as per the plan, we are now supposed to open our discussion wherein we want to invite inputs from our very esteemed gathering that we have here, and maybe we can open with Sam, given that we borrowed Sam from the floor to come up. So maybe Sam can open and then we'll take it from the floor. Over to you, Sam.
Just as a guide, do you want specific remarks on the study or my general reflections?
Yes,
or
generally.
My general reflections, okay. Well, firstly, just thank you very much for the opportunity and many congratulations to Fariha and the authors at STPI. I think it's a fantastic, very detailed study that adds something that's really quite rare, which is some concrete evidence on the impact on learning outcomes. I think, as Susan mentioned, it's a difficult thing to calculate, and I think it's extremely valuable, therefore, to have detail on specific interventions that have an impact on learning outcomes. So I very much congratulate all of you for your work on that, and it's fantastic. I think just very briefly, because I would love to hear from all the audience that we have here. My remarks probably around three things. Just quick highlights from the study. I just very briefly like to talk about the sort of the links between evidence and research and policy. I should probably first say that if you, if I haven't met you before, my name's Sam. I'm an EdTech and distance learning strategist at the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training here. I have to have a disclaimer and say that I previously worked for Edtech Hub, so any rude remarks I say about them will be loudly communicated, I'm sure. You informed them. Okay, that's good. That's good. But yes, so in terms of highlights from the studies, I think there's a few things that really jump out to me and that I think are particularly relevant for me, for my work here in the Ministry of Federal Education. The firstly is around your point about understanding the complexities. I think one of the things that I've noticed when working on EdTech here in Pakistan is that, like, there are educational technology solutions that are suggested, but a really deep understanding of the educational problem needs to be done first. I think something that really sticks in my mind at the moment is that the huge emphasis on, for example, the out-of-school children crisis. And it's tempting to reach for an education technology solution that can somehow solve that crisis. It's tempting to see technology as some sort of silver bullet that says, okay, well, if only we can get hold of TV, then all children will come back to school. But I think what that relies on, well, the mistake of that is thinking that it's a simple problem. It's an incredibly complex problem, as you all know. Children are out of school for a variety of reasons. And therefore, the technology solutions that you reach for will have to be adapted to those specific aspects of the problem. So I think understanding the complexities is a really, really important point, and I welcome that. I think the findings around, well, the focus on access is incredibly important. I think from what I've understood of the pandemic effects here, there is a real danger of technology widening the so-called digital divide. Some children really do not have the access to the technologies, and we do have to think about technology as something for every child, particularly in the work that I'm doing. Like, I'm always reminded of the sort of constitutional obligation of the government to provide education for all children. And I think that has to be at the forefront of thinking on technology. So I welcome the access point. And finally, I think just as a smaller finding, the focus on WhatsApp and SMS is really valuable. I think part of the thinking that's going on, that I see now going on at the federal level, is, okay, well, what are the strategies long term for using technology? And one of the things I think is really relevant is building on what already exists, using the technology and using the strategies that already exist. And something like this finding about 93% of students using WhatsApp strikes me as something that you can build on rather than reinventing the wheel. Just a final point, and I'd love to hear from you, but is really what, if we step back a bit, not just from the findings of this study, what I'm really excited by and what I'd love to have your thoughts on is how do we turn something like this from an individual study that happens in once and we have an event into an evidence-based sort of ecosystem that can feed into policy, exactly as Dr. Mahmood said. There's a real need, I think, for this sort of research to become a sort of constant process whereby findings are constantly fed into government processes to do exactly as you say, Dr. Mahmood, so that when there comes an opportunity for spending on EdTech, that the findings of this sort of research are right at the forefront of policymakers' minds. So I just invite you to think about that and to think about the sort of forums, like you say, that are needed. What kind of group do we need? Who needs to be in it? How often do they have to meet? What kind of processes do we need to get this sort of information into the hands of policymakers? But then I would also invite you as researchers to think about the world of policymakers. Something that I'm very new to, but something that I'm learning is that government works differently, right? Government is under huge pressure to move extremely fast and to make decisions in incredibly fast timescales. And I think that puts an onus on researchers to say, okay, am I researching problems government need to solve? Am I doing it in a way that's fast enough? There's no point developing a 3-year research program about EdTech because government will have moved on by then. So are the findings ready and in the hands of policymakers when they need them? So I think thinking about that as a researcher would also be valuable. But yeah, I'd really invite this opportunity to think about, okay, can we make a forum? Can we make a group? Can we do something to make this kind of thing sustainable long term? And I'd invite anyone to come up to me and talk about making that a reality, because it's something that I would love to contribute to, and I would love to hear from anyone else in that area. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. And with your call, and I think we can take the same call to our audience here, and it's good that you're here at the right moment. You are connect with the ministry as well, given the work that you're doing and the fact that you're sitting in the ministry. So I think it's over to our guests now, so you can identify yourself and please make your interventions, which can strengthen the subject matter today. Also, if you have any comments, feedback on the study, you're more than welcome. Please.
Assalamu alaikum. It's Amna Usman Khan. I'm from Beacon House School System, and it was really good to hear Mr. Nasir also, and Ma'am Farhiya, you, and a few of the very valuable suggestions given by Ms. Bela. There are just few things I think we need to discuss those ones, because when you were, sharing your study, there was one slide mentioning where, in the different countries where you have started the study. It was pretty concerning, like saying Pakistan with the type of countries, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Kenya, and Bangladesh. Are we really gone to that place? This is something very concerning. There might be reasons why we have picked up those countries along with Pakistan, because it is something that is reality versus perception. I belong to a place where I'm working in a private institute, and the type of opportunities that we have for our students, they are immense. And not only talking about Beacon House, there are, I think, other school systems who have provided a lot of opportunities, and we have facilitated the students in the community, and even the middle level schools. They have worked very well during the COVID crisis. To our surprise, we didn't have to teach our teachers how to use the tools, online resources. Rather, they got themselves into the process of researching themselves and engaging themselves in a process of exploring the tools and making the teaching and learning more facilitative for the students. So this was something that when you are going for such studies, there have to be few good examples also taken up from the community. And community has really benefited. If we talk about the education during the 3 years, the education never stalled. It was there. Rather, there was another level of parallel understanding of the tools, online resources, and teaching through education going on, which was never measured. We are emphasizing on what they have studied, how much they have studied, how the grades are going, how the percentages are working up, how the marks are working up. What about the other skills, the personalized level of teaching and learning that they have started learning? Getting engaged into self-study, getting engaged into research. This was a very different thing that we have really developed in the students, and inculcated the urge of exploring the things by themselves, becoming their own teachers. And the teachers also, who simply they jumped into another area. There were many teachers who were not into user technology so much, like Urdu teachers, Islamic teachers specifically. So they got engaged into such things which they were not adapted to, but they explored and they went into such things. So overall, there was something coming up in the society that needs to be understood, that needs to be realized and appreciated. So this was something that I really wanted to share. Mr. Nasir mentioned the TV is used as an educational source. You're very right, sir. Why this is going on? Because what I have felt for my own self and for my children, TV is a source where there are going to be pre-designed programs. Internet is a place where you're going to go for self-research and study. All right, I'm good looking at all these 4 or 5 things. This makes sense to me. This doesn't make sense to me. Exploring is easy. When you go to the television, the programs are pre-designed. So it's not your side of education. So I think it's a very valid point. And if government is making any such plans, I think investing more on the online and developing the baseline, that's going to be a better one. A very good point made over here about the TAL. I very much agree with Ms. Bela that yes, the TAL has to be used in intervention. But I'll give you a very live example that we are doing in the schools. The way Mr. Nasir said, that it can be used for a time period, taken up as an intervention, use it for a few months, few times, some time, and then it can just proceed. Like we have Easy Urdu program. The Easy Urdu program is for the students who are joining us from any type of country, or they are the foreign nationals, or they have never studied Urdu at all. And now they join Beacon House and they say, Kitty, we have never studied Urdu, and our children don't know. They are coming in grade 6, 7, and at times they're coming in grade 9. So we find out what is the baseline, and then we design the program. The program has been designed by Beacon House, and then we put them at a particular level. Okay, they have crossed, they will require 2.5 months or years, or they require 2 years. And then, after 3 years, we know where we have to reach for that child. So this is very much linked to what people are talking about. The same thing can be happening in mathematics also, in furthering, because Urdu, English, that is the same, the medium, the language that we are talking about. So yes, this is one thing that can be used, and the program is already in use by a few of the schools, and they're doing it. But giving a terminology to a concept that is going on in an institution, that's also something that we can look into. And the teaching mathematics online, I did a lot of study on this thing in my school, because when we were in the COVID situation, one thing which was really hampering the grades of students were the mathematics teaching. So I started working with 4 of my teachers, and I found out the teachers who are apt in using the right type of tools. Like when you talk about the Jamboard, and you talk about, there are a few other resources that I have with me. So if you're using the right type of resource, like the Cubits, Geometry Pad, Fluid Math, Madboard, the teachers who are good at using it, they were able to use the right tools, go for the right connections, and teach the mathematics more fluently, smoothly. Over and above, maths required a lot of practice. So again, these 2 things were the issues which were really hampering the grades in mathematics. So, just a little humble sharings with you people, but yes, we are there, and we really appreciate what we have done in these 3 to 4 years. And I'm sure that the good examples are also going to be taken from different schools, because they have done a lot of work. And due to this work, this year, there was another program coming in A levels, where the students are going to be sitting at home, and they will be studying at home. And that's going to be, just going to school for 2 days or 3 days only, and, taking the whole of the education from the same teachers at home. So that has some sort of validity. It has a lot of, appreciation at this level, and the efficiency also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your very excellent interventions, and really coming from a practitioner, of course, I think that brings a lot of value to our work as well. Yes, we can move to any of the next interventions.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Sami, an assistant professor working in Faculty of Education, Allama Iqbal Open University, Islamabad. This was lovely discussion, and many important points were raised, and blended learning was also a solution. No doubt this technology will be futuristic and that data Dr. Freya shared was from the backward-most districts of Punjab. If I'm right, they were Chishtiya and Bahawalnagar tehsils. The same intervention may be recommended for similar districts. Me basically belong from Bahawalpur. It's nearby district to Bahawalnagar, and we approximately 6 faculty members are here, and the variety is there. Dr. Ajmal is from distance learning. Dr. Buzdar is also from teacher education. Dr. Azhar is with us. If I'm right, sir, your mathematics science education. Dr. Sidra is also from teacher education department, and Dr. Nasir Hussain is from early childhood. And my subject of specialization is English language teaching. So we may assist you in strengthening the intervention and for expansion of your project. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Would you please? Please.
My name is Sidra Rizwan. I am assistant professor in Namak Open University in Teacher Education Department. I would like to, I appreciate Madam Faria's work. And as Dr. Nasir was talking about evidence-based decision making, so it's very right if we go to multiple areas, okay, fine, backward areas, but if we get data from multiple provinces, all the provinces, so we'll strengthen the decision making, and we'll get contradictory results, and we'll come to proper conclusions. And Madam from Beacon House said that they are doing, obviously elite schools did wonders during COVID, which our government schools children were deprived of all this. And takeaway from this is like you spoke a lot about our technique, and so my takeaway as it is a way for accelerated learning is the situation in Pakistan is that most of our children are weak. I'm talking about government sector in English. So why not adopt this method for English? Even at graduation level, we have maximum number of failures in English. So why not adopt this at national level?
Sam Wilson.
Mr. Sam is here, and he can obviously, this is, everybody knows, this is evidence you already have. Now, if there is a technique which can benefit, why not use it? And you have the data right now, you have the technique, you can now put this up to the policymakers. And one more thing for Mr. Sam, that he said what government needs, research should provide that. We have a lot of research has taken place, but from where do the government get their information? How do they make decisions? There is a disconnect between the researchers and the policymakers or the middleman. A lot of good research has been done. They are lying in the libraries, but I don't know how government they make decisions. So it's up to Mr. Sam now to take our voice up to the policymakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. No pressure, eh? I think just quickly on your first point, in terms of teaching at the right level, well, it particularly like accelerated learning was referenced earlier. I think something to watch out for is that SURF is conducting a study in Islamabad Capital Territory, utilizing some of these techniques specifically, and including the use of technology. That's also something that's also been sponsored by the Edtech Hub, but I would look out for the findings of that I think would be relevant and useful to your inquiries. Thanks.
One point in my mind that using
so if you could introduce yourself for
Dr. Ajmal from Allama Iqbal Open University, and fascination effect of the gadgets used in the teaching learning is also have some impact. As you elaborated in your study that some were just first time they use the gadgets. And is there any variable to investigate that the fluent, how many were the fluent user of the gadgets, and who are the first and due to fascination and they were using those gadgets? So that pace of the usage of that gadgets is very important in the learning outcomes as well. So in this study there is nothing about this one because this is a very important factor, as after in COVID-19 period in our university we started online education. So most of the students in the rural areas they don't have the skill to use these, and when we place them in front of those gadgets for the fascination purpose and just for enjoyment, they work for a few days and their learning achievement and their performance was very good. But after that it comes down. And in some areas and sometimes their skill was very slow, but when they become fluent with and conversant with that skill and with that gadgets, their performance really high up. So, is there any variable in this study that the fascination effect of the gadgets effect on the teaching learning process?
Thank you for a very interesting question. Yes, we did have a whole section on that, and just in the interest of time, I wasn't able to cover that graphical presentation. So we did actually ask the students, actually the only device that was available to them was a smartphone, and that too primarily of the parents. So there was not a diversity in terms of gadgets available. It would have been a very pertinent area if they had laptops and tablets and other gadgets available. So we did probe the students about their level of skill set concerning how are they able to use smartphone. For example, they're only able to download some see some YouTube videos, or they're able to access these digital apps, or it's the only purpose they use it for gaming. So we did ask them, are they able to text? Are they able to read messages? So the level or their skill set, we can always model that. We can I can definitely share it afterwards in terms of the graphical presentations that we have.
Yeah, this is Naveed Hussain, an independent researcher. So I came across some key findings. So during COVID, I think there were two programs. One was this Talimgar, and another was Teleschool program. Government probably has invested a lot, making these programs available. So what was the missing link that created this gap? Like there was the edtech education was ineffective. Secondly, was there any program going in parallel that created social mobilization or that created awareness regarding these very programs? Because I think some studies show that more than 70% of people have access to TV, but that was never used. Thank you.
Yes, so I mentioned earlier at the onset of the study that the tele school was going on, but there was not huge viewership or adaptability by students. I mean, we probed for the reasons as well. First of all, it clashed with their timing, and especially we have to just keep this lens that this is a study of an economically disadvantaged area, and the dynamics are purely different from the affluent classes or the metropolitan areas or the urban dynamics that ma'am referred to. So, for example, when the children of an urban or metropolitan area, the schools went into closures or lockdown, the children sat at home. But we found out that in Bahawalnagar district, even in one school, we found out that 60 children, they dropped out, and where they were absorbed into child labor. So that's a totally different dynamics that, and again, the accessibility of TV as per the graph shown, that it's bit lower than access to mobile phone. And again, in that landscape, television is not particularly seen as a tool of education. So, and again, when children were at home, a huge responsibility factor of engaging them into learnings or any improvement in their learning outcomes, it actually came on the shoulders of the parent. And again, the literacy divide or the literacy difference in literacy level of the parents from economically disadvantaged area or from advantaged area, that's again creates a huge impact. They were not able to actually link or process that, or actually have these kind of, and we asked them that what your children did, and they were like, we kind of engaged them in household chores. The girls were actually working at home, and it's not more seen as an opportunity to engage them into some other mediums of education, or actually to just make up for these learning losses that these crises have created.
Hi, I'm Zulfikar Kazalbash from the ministry. I have a couple of questions on your research. First of all, very interesting comment that you just made, that in these poor areas, it seems like access to mobile phone is easier than TV, and TV is not really use for education. It has a different purpose in the household. So building on that, do you feel that if we were to continue a post coronavirus policy, would you recommend that we favor the TV as a learning channel, because based on your research, or would you see that for that disadvantageous communities, mobile learning is a better option through the smartphone?
It's not a question about one particular device that which is better than the other. It's about the local context, that how things are operating in that particular area, and what are the perceptions of the community, and how we actually, just what to which Susan referred, that how we have to code design keeping in view the local evidence. So it's not a problem that there's something wrong with tele-education, or there's like mobile devices are more popular phenomena. It's about how the community sees both the tools, whatever level of access is there. As I mentioned earlier, that mobile phone is present in majority of the household. Boys, they do have more access from their parents in terms of mobile usage as compared to girls. So I think so for regions and for different areas, I think so we have to first factor in the local evidence and what kind of community perceptions are there, and what is the ideal tool for facilitation, and what kind of adaptability is there. Like just I mentioned that when we went to Chishtiyan, the schools were even using Google Classroom. But when we went to Fort Abbas, I had to ask teacher twice or thrice if they know what Zoom is. And they had no idea what Zoom is. And there was nothing wrong with the teacher. The teacher was very well qualified. They were all, they knew all the syllabus and everything, but they were not aware of these apps and gadgets and modes of communication. So it's more about what is available on ground, what kind of access is there, and what kind of usage capabilities are there, and what kind of barrier dimension is in between the access and the usage paradigm that is actually not enabling these individuals to actually make use of it.
Follow-up question: were there teachers in the government schools that you looked at? Was there a trend that how many of them were keeping in touch with the students, and roughly on average what percentage of this communication was happening, and the frequency of this? Does your report cover all of these things?
Actually, our sample comprises of private sector school. As I mentioned, that the entire government schools, they went to complete closure. They were not offering online education. They were not delivering online education. So that was a complete period where the children were, just on their own at home, studying through parents or on their own, and there was no regular classes online going on. So it's only the private sector, and yes, private sector is progressive. We were very surprised to see, even we witnessed some outliers, like I mentioned that one of the schools in the Bahawalnagar district that we actually reached out to for developing the teaching for at right level syllabus, where they were supposed to do matching of the syllabus with the capabilities of the students that we had in that group. So they were using all these cutting edge apps like Study Ladder, CK assessments. They were just, as part of their school activities, they were reaching out to students, their own students, and actually giving them all the assignments and everything. But on the other hand, there were private sector schools that were not able to deliver, and they were only able to just communicate through WhatsApp and send notes. And even certain private sector school which used to call in parents on monthly basis or fortnightly basis to just come and collect the content and the syllabus for students just in hard packages. So it varies from system to system, but at least the private sector did survived to a certain extent and was able to deliver, and that was our sample.
I think to Zulfikar Saab's question, I think that our co-author on the study, Dr. Rabia Nazir, I think she also wants to add. Zulfikar Saab, is she online? Ji, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you. I was just trying to respond to the question regarding the teleschool. Most of the people have talked about the disconnect, that why a teleschool has not brought any impact on the learning of the students. When we did this baseline and endline, we found out that 90% of the students have not heard about whether there is any teleschool program going on. So my suggestion is that if we want to, like some people have said that a lot of investment by the government has been made on the teleschools. So I think that this teleschool program must be embedded with the school teaching. The teachers who are delivering a lesson, they must guide their students to listen that particular concept or particular lesson from the teleschool. So they can kind of embed both in person and the learning from this media. That's why I think that's why most of the students were unaware about teleschool. So if the government wants to use this instrument or use this education technology, they must embed this with the ongoing teaching at school level. The teachers must um, guide their students to learn those lessons from TV as well. So I was just trying to respond to that question about the teleschool. Thank you.
Thank you. Ji Mohammed.
I'm Aisha Sohail from Beacon House, and my question is that at the time of this study, COVID was very active. There must be so many other studies done provincially, at a certain level with good data. Ever since we have come back to the new norm, has there been any collection of those, what is the, continued in some way or the other? And what is the sort of policy status of all this now?
Yes, so we came across hard evidence that school, they did have this concept in mind that this must continue. If this digital footprint has been added due to COVID, it's positivities which it brought because of online. So when we introduced, for example, these cutting edge apps to these students of CK 12 and especially the extensive use of Khan Academy material and IXL and everything, so they did have this commitment that they will definitely continue it within future. And still we are in the times of COVID, and it's a new normal. So and again, when we went back for endline, by that time school opened up. There was a pocket when the school opened up, and we asked the students, and they were very much cordial towards adaptation of these tools and learning through these. I mean, there's no unwillingness or this huge potential to actually continue with these tools. And I think so the way digital footprint has accelerated in terms of Edtech, it must continue and must not go towards a reverse order.
I am Ayub Buzdar from AIOU. So first of all, I am thankful and appreciate your work. We have a lot of findings, workable findings here. So I think most of us are asking about the methodological aspect of this research, because the methodology is related with the findings and the implementation and for policy provision. So in your first part of presentation, I perceived that you have conducted research on low-cost school, but later I came to know that no, you have also selected some participants from main chain schools, I think Beacon House or
No.
Okay, so your participants were from the low-cost school.
Yes,
okay.
You can say that private schools and in
private school and low cost.
Low cost, exactly.
So we do know that in school students in these schools
come from a particular social class.
Yes, exactly.
And they have some social economic barriers and social and religious taboos as well. And similarly, the teacher and that school also come from a specific class. And we do know that you said that they were well qualified, but I have conducted research on those areas, and we know that the teachers are hired and very low salaries, and that teachers have certain limitations. So we can also consider that thing. And the alarming are, for me, that was warning, that you have drawn a picture and some conclusion from that particular school, and we are recommending that conclusion for the country level or for other people. And so that was my concern. Thank you.
Actually, it's about a certain section of society. Again, I would say that that's economically disadvantaged, and it's a number of schools that it's not one school system that we refer to, but in our analysis we did make a wealth index comprising on, just I showed the way I showed it in my presentation, that household income, ownership of assets, expenditure. So we did model the wealth index as and age and gender of the students as covariates. So all that socioeconomic aspects, they were captured in the analysis along with the learning levels. So when we were doing this analysis, we were very much concerned that there must not be any compositional bias, or our population must have the same socioeconomic characteristics. And I can assure you that all the students, for example, their household income, it came into a certain bracket and not above that. I mean, it's not a big mix of wealthy household getting mixed up with low income household. It's primarily a study especially concerned on what happened to the economically disadvantaged, the learning outcomes in a economically disadvantaged location of Pakistan. So it can't be representative of, again, the way Dynamics Word and ma'ams mentioned that the urban centers were far ahead in terms of usage, in terms of adaptation, and there wasn't anything on the table that they did not try to capture. So that's a different side of the mirror that we're talking about. So in that, that's the thumb rule of a randomized controlled trial, that there must not be any compositional bias or selection bias, and we did ensure that as the first thumb rule.
So one big issue for us at the ministry right now, that a problem that we are trying to tackle is the role, how important is the involvement of the school in the success of distance learning, whether it is through teleschool or whether it is through one of the internet portals. So your colleague who is online made a very interesting comment that when you guys looked at the learning through these channels, it was most effective or only effective when the school was involved, when the resources of the school was involved, the teachers were involved. And essentially, distance learning in Pakistan today is a very school-oriented formula, right? Because it is tied to the education system, and so if there is an interruption, it's in use. But I don't know if we can really expect the 22 million children that are out of school to benefit from this, because there is no culture in which these people are going to study on their own without any assessment, without any tie-in to certification and that kind of stuff. So these two thoughts, the first one relating to the importance of involving the school in distance learning to make distance learning successful in Pakistan, and the second one that distance learning without school is a very small opportunity for us till we evolve it to a much better campaign. What evidence, first of all, do you agree with these two observations? And then secondly, what evidence can you provide us to strengthen these particular arguments?
Yes, in this regard, I think so. The good thing about evidence is that it gives you a holistic view. It's myopic foresight if we only consider the student as the key actor in the equation. The paradigm comprises of 4 pillars: the student, the parents or the caregiver, the school, and the teachers. And again, we do have global evidence that If the medium of intervention or the leverage point of intervention are teachers, the students, they end up with better learning outcomes rather than adaptation at their own end alone. So again, the framework comprises of four key actors. School is of prime importance. Their engagement with school, what kind of infrastructure does school have? And Dr. Abia earlier raised a very good point in one of our stakeholder discussions that we were doing with ideas. Since Dr. Abia belonged to the same landscape of Bahawalpur, so these schools, they do have these digital desktops or screens installed in labs, but access is not provided to the students, or they're limited few hours, or students are denied access that these machines will not function in the right manner if they are overly used. So that is again an issue, that how that infrastructure is managed, how much access do students have, or only it's about the supply side, that is just putting in resources and efforts and money, but somehow that is not reflected in usage and adoption by student, or there's lack of understanding. For example, I came across a number of students who had desktop at their home or laptop at their home, but they never knew how to use it. And even in Chishtiya or in Fort Abbas and in all these districts. So all the four pillars, they matter for the learning paradigm.
I understand that we have Mr. Imdad Baloch Sahab as well, who's the country co-lead of Edtech, in case he would like to comment.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Because my colleagues, they have already spoken, and I'm Imdad Baloch. I work with Edtech Hub as a country co-lead, and I have been involved particularly in the education sector for last 20 years. And with reference to Edtech Hub, I have been involved for last 2.5 years. And mostly we have been doing a lot of research, and some colleague, I think in this session, I have asked, are there some more studies available? Yes, you can go to Edtech Hub's website. There's the evidence library. If you click there, you can find numerous, insightful pieces. Some are related to Pakistan, some are not related to Pakistan. And apart from that, because I have been involved in some other research, like World Bank has done research on technology for teaching, and there are quite some interesting findings, because I have been interacting with the teachers, with parents, with policymakers. When they speak about those things, those quite insightful, and what we are discussing right now, findings are available in that studies. Edtech Hub has recently concluded, we have developed a piece for UNICEF that's not publicly available so far, but particularly the discussion that we are doing for use of TV. Yeah, definitely, because it is a one tool, and we can't say it's a full solution. It can be used as a supplemental resource. But interestingly, like I personally, when I talk to parents and teachers, they say, how many parents are aware that this content is being broadcasted through TV? Parents and the schools, they a little bit showed their concern, because system did not communicate to the parents through school, because something is communicated to the parents via teachers or school. Parents take it very seriously. Otherwise, if it even we have seen government put a lot of resources on advertising those apps, and also the tele school program or putting advertise on newspapers and other means of communication, but it did not go through the school. So parents were actually not so much concerned. If it had it been channelized through schools, I think it would have been more effective, because they see it has some connection what Zulfikar Sahab was saying, like it's fortunately or unfortunately our system is more assessment driven and school driven. If something has a connection with school or with textbook, parents take seriously. Otherwise, even parents say when we put the TV on and we ask the kid watch this, what is going on there. So means all of a sudden kids actually like dodge his parents. Oh, sorry, it's not it's not my subject. It's not for my grade. It's something really means above my grade or the lower my grade. If parents are not, I think that was one of the findings which Susan and I think Dr. Faria they were speaking. Like if parents parents who had some level of education means they engage their kids watching these gadgets or tele school programs. Parents who did not have means a certain level of education or literacy, so their kids were not so engaged. That was one of the gray area or the weakness. So these all can be looked into. But I think teaching through interactive mode, that's always helpful rather than just broadcasting or transmitting something. That's always challenging. Edtech Hub is in Pakistan because we have been doing research, but for from last September, Edtech Hub where we saw definitely you can produce a lot of good research if those research are not utilized. Because our experience informs us because there are good research, all are put on the shelves. Nobody cares to read those unless you create such a situation or you push someone to read or you present it. So this is one kind of the forum where I must congratulate Dr. Faria, SDPI team. They came up with a really good study and useful findings, and that's why everyone is debating and contributing. That's a really kind of a and this is what Pakistan is actually lacking. Currently, we don't have that kind of a forum where researcher, like there was the colleague who said he's an independent researcher, he can come over and present it unless he finds some sponsor to do that. There's no established forum. So Edtech Hub has been doing supporting government in policy work, particularly like with federal ministry. We have been collaborating on different pieces. I was happy to hear from Dr. Bella Jamil when she talked about non-formal education, also collaborating with the KP government. We are already, Edtech Hub is already in connection with them, and we have spoken colleagues there. And similarly, we are in touch with Qaid in Punjab because they are using technology to train around their 0.4 million teachers. And unfortunately, expertise in terms of systematically documenting these interventions are not available in every institute. So we are there to, we offered our support to them, and similarly, we are collaborating with Balochistan government, but these all things are at initial stage. But this landscape is challenging, and there are a lot of questions, and we don't say Edtech is a solution for everything, but this is something we can capitalize and whatever you say, but you are not going to escape technology now, because this is what we all know. So this is the beginning, and this is a good discussion. I think the ministry is on the top of these things, and also our partner governments and a partner organization, they are coming up, and hopefully we can see more evidences coming up. And these evidences, like someone some quoted like a SARPS study, because that's teaching at right level, and this is one of the interventions that's happening in Islamabad. And its the research part is being funded by Edtech Hub, and its implementation part is being funded by World Bank and the ministry. And this is really we are also excited and waiting for the findings, but it would take time because it's just going to start. The implementation just going to start. So for any academic evaluation or seeing an impact, it wouldn't come in 6 months or 1 year. It may take a longer time. Maybe even 2-year time wouldn't be enough, I would say. So I am glad to see everyone around, and please do reach us, because Dr. Susan Nukola, she shared Edtech Hub's contact, and Dr. Faria is there, and Assam is there. So we are available and we are happy because there are a lot of academia around. So if you have a question, you can ask us. Otherwise, you can go to our evidence library, click there and see. And if you have some particular questions around particular any offer that Edtech Hub is making, so we would be happy to contribute to that as well. So thank you, Dr. Sab, and
Thank you, Dr. Imdad sir.
May I please? Can I just say something?
I think.
Yeah, can I just say something?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can go first and then later, ma'am.
So I'm the head of research at Beacon House. Prior to this, I developed the school improvement framework for Punjab, which is currently in place. I've led the impact assessments of one of the largest Eden initiative in the prior government. So it was really interesting to see, hear about your intervention and to see the innovative apps that you had included in your intervention. My question here would be that since this was just restricted to one grade level, which is grade 8, I would call this differentiation versus teaching at the right level, because teaching at the right level would, that kind of intervention would include multi-grades, where you're looking at age groups versus grade levels, right? So since it was just at one grade, I mean, I would like to ask you why you just selected one grade for that. Another question I had was something which resonated with my previous EdTech experience, which was your parental communication. And in the government sector, that's the one thing which we've seen lacking, which is the community part. Students come to school, but what they do, nobody really knows because nobody is in touch with the parents. So you were using the mechanism of SMS, right? In ours, we used phone calls, which were more expensive and required more investment from the government at that time. So again, my question would be why the choice of SMS and how frequently would that SMS come?
Yes, so parental mechanism was there for sure. As I mentioned at the time of presentation, that if in these interventions the students were not responding, because when there's a treatment group, it can't be taken for granted that all will go under the intervention. There will be certain group members who will be needing compliance or just push for compliance. So in that regard, we did communicate with parents, because essentially the mobile ownership lies with the parents. It's either the father's phone or the mother's cell phone that students were using for WhatsApp communication. At the time of the formation of the WhatsApp group for multiple interventions, we did communicate beforehand to parents that we are actually devising these groups. Please make sure that your child participates in that. It's important for the enhancing learning outcomes or scores, and parents, they were quite concerned as well. I mean, although they were not able to play the role at home because it was kind of overshadowed by the aspects of COVID, and especially these disadvantaged segments of society where majority of the parents were daily wagers. So what they were very much concerned was what was happening with their children in terms of learning crisis and education. So we did communicate to them. Number of parents responded that yes, we will ensure that the children, they will submit the assessment, they will actually go through the learning material. And again, why we were able to target different multiple grades. Actually, we did, in addition to 8th, we did target grade 7, because in certain schools, there was like a common syllabus for 7th and 8th, and the same comprehensive or understanding level for the grade appropriate tests that we introduced for setting the baseline. But as you know, that impact evaluation, RCT, they come with cost. There's quite some cost for formation of groups, and especially for monitoring them. So like our intervention, all the interventions, they went on for 4 months or 4 months plus. So we were actually monitoring each and every step of the intervention. And it was, since it was mentioned that it was a C19 small grant, and the time horizon was also limited. So that was one of the limitations of, you can say, the timeline, or also the budget, that we were able to just do these concurrent 3 interventions. But of course, when it comes to scaling and innovation, it depends that what is the objective, and scaling and innovation comes accordingly. So if there's a need to revisit or scale it up for any policy inference, we can definitely do that.
Did you have multiple teachers teaching different groups?
Yes, yes.
So realistically, in the government sector, that would not work because they do not have sufficient teachers. So that's why I'm saying this is more in terms of differentiation, where a teacher can cater to, if it's one teacher, which we at the private sector do try to encourage our teachers to identify the key learning outcomes which students are weak in, and then cater to them in groups. But realistically, in the government sector, this will require a whole level of investment, or in rearrangement of responsibilities, where they're not teaching sequentially, then they're actually teaching in groups across age groups.
Actually, teaching is subject specific. So there's like subject-based teacher, one teacher for Urdu actually assessing students for all the limitations or where do they stand, and subject expert in that. So, I mean, this is the way we proceeded, that it was the 3 prime subjects. And again, the thumb rule is the way ACER covers it, that basic learning and literacy or foundation skills in 3 core subjects. One is the mother language, and one is mathematics and English. Again, the international benchmark of foundational literacy and numeracy. So it was
one teacher.
One teacher per subject. For example, one teacher for Urdu, one teacher for English, and one teacher for maths. And of course, a teacher of maths is only in the right position to assess students in mathematics. It's a teacher of Urdu can't do it, so it was subject based.
So was that whole group given one intervention in terms of the concepts that they were being taught, in terms of the videos and the assessment?
Yes, so it was actually 3 interventions. So because we have to isolate the impact of intervention, because if the impact is coming, we cannot just give all the intervention to one group, because then we cannot isolate that from which intervention the impact is coming. But we did try this in the compound effect intervention, where we combined all 3, but we did isolate each of the intervention in certain schools, so we can see that what kind of impact is coming in isolation, and when we actually combine all 3 interventions, what kind of impact is coming. So this is again.
I'm sorry, I think I'm not being very clear. So you mentioned that you did the assessment, which was for if they're at grade 2 level, and then grade 8 level assessments.
And then grade appropriate.
Yes. Grade appropriate assessments. So there was not much description of how many groups were at which specific level. That's why I'm a bit confused.
Actually, both the assessments were prior to formation of the groups. That was actually at the time of the baseline, when we were actually calculating the initial conditions, or where do they stand at the very start before we launch the intervention. Intervention is actually the treatment. First, we need to understand where do they stand. So we had to do a SIR because it was economically disadvantaged area. We needed to know whether they can do foundational literacy and numeracy of grade 2. And again, when we did that, we found a ceiling effect that 90% plus of them were able to qualify, which meant that all these grade 8 students, they did have that ability to actually solve that ASER grade 2 Urdu, English, maths, alphabetics. Yes, sure. So and then we ruled out ASER became redundant, and then we transitioned to the grade appropriate. Dr. Rabia, the author of the study, wants to add to the conversation. Please, Rabia, please.
Yes, I want to talk about the TAR cost effectiveness. I have missed some part of the questions, but I heard that she was talking about that if you group the students as per their learning level, you have to have more teachers, you have to have more time. There is a lot of evidence on TAR now, and there are many methods you can use to reduce your cost. And one of the methods is that you just give a 1 hour or half hour remedial instruction to the weaker students. It's not another group. You just pick out the weak students and give them a 1 hour remedial instruction after the school time or in summer camps. And that instruction may be delivered by the teachers, the regular teachers, or some volunteers may be hired for that. So cost can be minimized in some of the cases. Another point, actually I was raising hand a bit earlier. I want to endorse the point of school involvement in the whole of the Edtech process. When we were delivering these instructions and when we were implementing these interventions, we actually formed different WhatsApp groups of students. But since the teachers of those schools were not part of those WhatsApp groups, the students' behavior was very passive and they were not active. So that's why we had to involve the school teachers, and then we contacted their class teachers actually, and we added them into the WhatsApp group, and we asked them to motivate the students so that they may participate in the intervention or in the study. So that's why we feel that school involvement in any kind of intervention is important. Another point that was raised some time earlier is, I think this is clarification about the points. Priya in her presentation told that almost 90% of the students have smartphones at their homes. So it created a kind of confusion that you can go for any intervention that involves smartphones. But the problem is only smartphone is not important or necessary for implementing a tech intervention, because the cost of internet is also important, and the area in which we administered these interventions, in most of the areas there was no access to the internet, and in some of the cases the cost of internet was beyond the capacity of the parents. So smartphones may be a tool to implement attack interventions, but we need to see the socioeconomic dynamics of the area before that. And in our discussion with Dr. Rabia Malik in our stakeholder interviews, the one point that Priya has already mentioned, that we, when it comes to the cost of the intervention, and we have the parents who cannot afford even 500 per month internet cost, we must provide in-school interventions. In-school intervention means you can install a computer lab, you can have a computer lab in the school, or you can have a science lab in the school. But the problem in Pakistani schools is that all the computer labs and all the science labs are just locked up. The students are not allowed to touch them because the teachers fear that they will be held accountable for any destruction of any type of instrument. So it came out from my observation from this study that we must, rather than implementing new or rather than bringing in new investment, or rather than bringing in new tools, we must first utilize these dormant or passive infrastructure that is available at school, and that can that actually involves the cost from the supply side, but it may cover, or it may not be a problem for the parents from the disadvantaged areas. I also want another point to make here. Actually, I don't remember the name of the person that was sitting next to Dr. Priya. He actually talked about replacing the system with TAR. Actually, the point is not replacing, it is about the embedded learning or blended learning. You can have your regular teaching hours as well as you can remediate with some half hour or 1 hour, or on weekend basis you can give a remedial instruction to the weak students so that they can catch up with the better students. And another point that has been raised by all of the discussants here was about the implications of the study, that whether these studies can, these implications can be applied to all. First of all, we need to clear this point that the study is only was for disadvantaged students. So it doesn't apply on the students from higher income brackets or good economic
So maybe a technology glitch. So ma'am, yourself, and then you want to ask a question, Dr.
Dr. Abia, yes.
Okay, we'll just wait once she comes back. But ma'am, you wanted to add, please.
Just want to add a few things. I was really happy to hear from all the ones who are coming from those areas which are the underprivileged areas, or the areas from where we can really learn, because there's a huge gap between what you people are doing. It's a great job that you people are doing in those areas, and dealing with those parents and these students and working with those limited resources. It's a big thing. And I've really learned a lot from you people. But one thing, you know, when EdTech is working on it, it's I think going to be very pertinent if you can bring something on table for everyone, like, you know, planning something for every stakeholder, for school, student, parent, and teacher, all of them. We talked about these 4 ones. So when it's in the planning process, try to ensure that all those stakeholders have to be benefited, and something is placed for them, for all of them. Because if you're going to single out a single one, a parent, or even, you know, a school, that's going to be something which is going to become a drag for the whole program. And the other thing is that initially you have started about just Bahawalpur region, and then it's only for the underprivileged one. Why not to think about giving something to every segment, the privileged, the middle ones, and the underprivileged ones? Let's plan for everyone, because we have learned something from a study which is coming for an underprivileged area. So might be we become some sort of full resource for the middle ones, and might be you are able to plan something which is going to help the privileged ones also. So let's use this study and bring something for everyone, because when you look at this table, people from all cadres of in the schools of all levels are coming up. So let's try to benefit at all levels and try to devise something for all of us. Thank you. Thank you very much for this conference.
Sure, well noted. Thank you. Okay, I'll, if I may, please.
I wish to add something to her remark, if I am allowed, with your kind permission.
So madam ke baat kar lein.
Ji.
Madam pehle.
She wishes to put the question to Dr. Abia. I wish to add something.
Please.
That people from Bahawalpur wish their kids to learn and excel academically. The main issue is with, I suppose, as per my observation, is with teaching. One of my observation, teachers normally teach in terms of English language teaching I'm talking about. They use normally translation method. One of my observations